Well, hello. This is the final project full overview for the Harvard University CSCI E90 Fall 2019 final project. A little bit about me. My name is David Maiolo, and I've been a student here at Harvard University Extension School for about a year now, and this is my third class towards my Information Management Systems degree towards my MLA. I'm a cloud engineer at Microsoft right now. Exact title is Senior Premier Field Engineer, and that is in Azure. And as we'll see in a second here, that is the space that I have kind of designed and developed this project around. And also a neat tidbit about me is that I travel nonstop. So in 2019, I traveled an average of 24.8 or almost 25 cities per month. And that's about a city per day. Some of that is my own just wanting to go around to different cities, island hop if I'm in Hawaii or something, bouncing around. But that's a lot of cities. And even right now, I'm doing this presentation here from the back of my Jeep out on some cliff in Hawaii. So just kind of interesting tidbits about me. And no home base. So much travel that I don't really even have a central location. I'm everywhere, all over the place, always. Let's take a look at this project itself. Like, what did I do? Well, I set up a demo EMS environment, and that is the Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite in Microsoft's Azure Cloud. That's an endpoint management kind of program that allows you to manage Windows laptops, Android devices, iOS devices entirely from the cloud. It does also allow you to integrate it into some on-prem like SCCM configuration manager stuff, but it's meant to allow companies to manage endpoints from the cloud. Inside of that, I am going to enroll one sample device, or I've enrolled a sample device. It's been an Android device, and I'm going to walk through some of the compliance and configuration profiles that I created. So these are things that essentially get assigned to this device that I enrolled to do something with it. And then I'm going to interact with that tenant not through the website, but through the Microsoft Graph API and Azure API through a PowerShell program I made. And that program is also going to use some of the object data that's returned through the API to export as JSON files. What's the point of this project? Well, I kind of see it as something that could allow me to develop a program to do some type of tenant-to-tenant migration. So think two large corporations that maybe like Fox, Disney or something, they merge and they've both got kind of endpoint management suites in the cloud. They've got Azure Active Directory users in the cloud and security groups and things like that. And this could be used to export the data from each of those tenants, have it kind of, as JSON data that you could configure and perhaps change or modify, something like that, and then use similar type of API calls to put it back into the cloud to do some like merger is what I see. So let's jump right into the tenant itself. So I set up this demo EMS tenant, and you also see here it goes by the name Intune. So Intune is a component within EMS. So a lot of times people will simply call Enterprise Mobility and Security as Intune. And in order to create this, I just went to portal.azure.com, and there's a little wizard that comes up if you don't have a logon to create a demo or kind of like a little trial. And I did that, and you can see here I just created this Harvard student at, I think, Harvard CSCI E90.onmicrosoft.com. So this is just like a little test company I set up. Now we can see that I did enroll the Android device. So I picked up a device from Walmart and enrolled it here through the Android enrollment area. And then I created a compliance policy. This is just kind of something that once assigned to a security group that enrolled device or devices are within, are required to meet in order to become compliant within this space. So I think I had set one here to block non-rooted devices, and we can see here, yeah. So if you're a rooted device and you tried to enroll that device, you would get some message saying, oh, you need to not be rooted in order to be inside of this workspace. And then I created a device configuration profile, and you could almost think of these as kind of like group policy within the cloud. And I had created one here to block a camera app, something that you could probably do some similar type of concept through like a Windows device and group policy. And we can see here that the policy is designed to block the camera. So again, this policy is applied to a security group this Android device's security group that Android device is within, and that device would not be able to use its camera. And I actually have the device sitting next to me, and sure enough, the camera is not usable. And so again, this is just the full kind of Intune environment. There's some users I created here as well, some test users. Myself, who I'm a global admin in this environment, and John Harvard and Sally Harvard is just two kind of test users that we can see through this, which is the little program I made. So let me stop that so I can relaunch it and maybe talk about it for a moment. So this is a program that's designed to kind of traverse what we just saw there in the web and work with that data, but through PowerShell and through the Microsoft and Azure APIs. This first kind of launch PS1 script, what it does is it loads the other modules here. And it also will get the necessary tokens for the APIs that we're calling based on the user that you log into the program with here. And it'll generate that token so that it can actually log into the Graph API, and then it calls this get Microsoft Azure Tenant Tool menu, which is another function that I built in some of these other modules here that are imported. But let's first go through this kind of module of arrays. Now this contains this first giant array that has these subarrays within it. And really all I did is I created an array with subarrays, and those subarrays contain the URL and a friendly name of a URI or URL to an API call. What's interesting about the way I'm doing this is whatever that API returns, I don't necessarily know. I could add any API URL I want here, and in fact, I have played around with some more of them. Simply what I do is I just have some guesses of the structure of the data that will be returned. For example, like if I do this call to the users, I can say I don't know what users would come back, but I do know that it will be structured in a certain way, and I will show that data out in the program, whatever it might be. This module is just kind of building the menu function itself, which you can still see kind of down here. That I'll show you full screen in a second. But it just builds out the menu based on what is being built within the being returned from the APIs. And there's a little another backup menu, which is going to do some JSON export. And we can see here for the menu generation and for this kind of backup component that I'm going to show you, everything is just kind of done by traversing through whatever is returned from that API URL. Whatever it is, I'm going to just traverse through it and get as deep into that object as I can. You could think of it almost as like XML data. So I'm going to get as deep into it as I can, just through some kind of automated function, and then whatever it is, I'm either going to display to the screen or I'm going to back it up as JSON. So, I take no assumption of what the data is. I just take assumption of what the format of the data will be. And here's some more of the framework functions. So this is just kind of generating some of the sub menus, and this sub menu here is really where all the magic is. So this stuff up here is just kind of generally like just creating menus, but once we get to this submenu, we can actually see where I start to actually traverse through whatever is being returned from the URL. From that, you can see here whatever kind of comes back from this function that I wrote, and see I pass it this URI, and whatever that query is that came from the array that's being passed to this function, it just goes through it and turns it into a menu. And this is just kind of another module that's just miscellaneous stuff, like how the graph REST request is going to be done itself. So how am I actually going to get into the API and pull the data. And there's a little validation function I have here. Here's the JSON functions for actually exporting the data. The object data is JSON. And then there's just these authentication security functions, which are for generating the tokens. And these security functions I largely got, they were already written on some blog just generically by Microsoft on how to connect into Microsoft Graph API. So really whatever that magic is, I just kind of replicated it into my own function, and I just changed a couple things. So let's launch the program itself. So let me full screen this again. I'm going to go back to the kind of the invocation PS1 script here. So you can see I launched that, and it did an auto login just because the token hasn't expired yet. But had it have not, it would have just prompted up for a username and password into whatever your Azure tenant is. And you can see how this is being built out. Whatever these menus are really just come back from this here. We can see that this is just kind of a continuation of like Azure Active Directory, Azure Active Directory. So whatever I called that is going to come down into this menu function. And then we see that this array actually is calling this other function, which is going to return some more arrays. And within that are the URI. So the same thing's going to happen here. I hit 1. It's going to go inside of that, or essentially call this function, and it's going to launch this URI, and that is going to return this stuff. Now this I didn't know what it was going to return. It could change based on how Microsoft might develop this, but whatever it is, I just have it auto-generate into this menu, and we can even see whatever might be inside of that. So I'm going to go to the users, because I know we have some users, and it just lists that stuff. So then we see that there's users within that. And if it finds that it's kind of at the end of its rope, like there's the last thing that's being returned is an actual object, it's going to use out grid view to actually view that object. So we can kind of see that it has these different attributes. And this is what I generated inside of Intune. So if I went back here, we can see that, you know, if I created a new user, it would show up here. It's just that simple. It's pulling the same data, just being viewed through the API. So let's look at a few more things. Maybe we can look at the compliance. Or I'm sorry, we already went here. Let's take a look at the, yeah, there we go, device configuration. So I think I have a device configuration profile, and there's the block camera profile, and we can see some of the different data in there for that profile. This is data that it's not like you would need to know all this stuff in order just to manage the policy itself, but as I said earlier, if you're going to do some type of tenant-to-tenant migration where you needed to really understand the data, or at least kind of have a full object import back into another tenant, you're going to need all of these attributes. You know, Intune's going to expect all of these attributes filled out. And you can use the same objects that you call with slight modifications sometimes to that data, to that object, to then import back into a tenant as well. So it's nice that Microsoft did that, that the same type of format of what's returned by kind of a GET request is the same that you would do as like a set. So let's look at the part of this program that actually takes the same data and exports it as JSON. So you could almost say that this is a way of like backing up your whole Intune or Azure tenant. So we're going to do back up your Azure tenant. And let's go ahead and find this, just so I can keep myself organized. We're going to maybe create a new folder here. We'll call it like export test or something. No, close enough, whatever. And this is going to create some CSV files that indicate where the JSON came from. This is to help maybe organize if you were looking at this data and trying to work with it, because sometimes if you just look at the JSON file itself, you go, I don't really know what that is. So I take kind of the friendly name that's returned from a display name that these objects have, and then list that in the CSV file. So if we see, again, it just traversed through whatever was available, we open one of these CSV files up, and it's going to kind of list what's inside of these other directories as far as what the JSON stuff is. And here we're looking at the object data and the URI for it, kind of what the display name for those objects would be, the location that it was actually backed up to, and the category. So let's take a look actually at one of those kind of folders here. So this is the one we had open, and if we go into the Azure Vector Directory one, sure enough, we see these backup files listed. Here they are. And we're going to go ahead and, open one of these up. So we can do just probably Notepad++. And we're taking a look at the object data. So this is what is actually, same thing that would have been returned in that out-grid view is being what's shown here. But this would allow us to, let's say, go in and oh, I want to change this, right? I'm going to change this to something else. If I were going to go then import that into another tenant, it would then have that device name. Now, particularly if we thought of some data, maybe like a user. So I'm just going to guess maybe one of these will be a user. If you're going to export user data, the passwords, of course, not coming out. Even the hash password is not going to be exported out into the object file for security reasons. But if you're going to generate a new user by ingesting the same object, you would need a password. So there's going to be some attributes like a password that don't exist with the exported object, but that would be needed for the import object. So I could kind of see, as further development of this program, some type of way to understand the type of object that's being used. And if we were going to do some type of re-import, prompting for those extra attributes like, hey, you've got 100 users and each of those users are going to need a password. Would you like a auto-generated password assigned to each one of them? And then that saved as a CSV, so you know what that password is for first logon, and then set a bit for change password on first logon, something like that. So some type of tenant migration project. And that's what this is by and large. So you can kind of see that we've got these modules here, and then we have the export itself that was generated through this program. I want to thank everybody, or whoever actually sat through this. Thank you for your time. I hope you have a great holiday if you have not already had it before you're grading this, and I hope to catch you next semester. Thank you.